Hi, welcome to Cheats Church, or perhaps Mini Church, or Church in Five. Our attempt at getting across the substance of the message in just a few minutes. So pleased that you've joined in. Today we're looking at that great passage, Hebrews chapter 11, the roll call of faithful members of the people of God, and reflecting on what that might mean for us. One of the things I want to hone in on is the significance of the really surprising part when it gets through all the people of faith. By faith, Abraham's done this, someone else has done that. And then it says right at the end, but all these people didn't receive what they were promised. It's almost like a giant letdown. And yet, this tells us something about faith. It tells us that those people passed on the promise to the next generation. They saw that it wasn't all about them, and instead they realised that as they were faithful for a season, so they pass on to their next generation, the next group, the next community. People of faith understand that that the role they play is part of a bigger picture, a bigger vision of what God is forming and doing in the world. And that we are but one link in the chain of throughout time. I'm reading off my screen here. Buildings provide a really helpful example. Of course, the church is far more than a building, but church buildings often provide an example of what I mean here. Perhaps some of you have visited Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. I went there maybe 5 or 6 years ago and was struck obviously by the magnificence of the building, but also by the vision of such a structure. And at the front of the church there's a little explanation, a little model of how the church developed over the centuries. And there were two ancient small churches way back, over 1,000 years ago. And in the year 1160, the Bishop of Paris, Maurice de Sully, had the idea of a grand cathedral. And so 3 years later, the foundation stone was laid, and then the altar consecrated in 1189. The choir area, the facade and the nave were completed in 1250, and another 100 years went by before the porches, chapels and other decorative pieces were added. So I added all that up, and it's 190 years for most of the work to be completed. And Maurice de Sully, that visionary bishop, would have been long gone. Just as with the work of God's people, the vision of the cathedral was larger than one lifetime. Of course, the work never really stops. The main spire of Notre Dame was renovated in the 19th century when it was found to be unstable, and now, after the terrible fire of 2019, an enormous rebuilding is underway. But each generation receives the holy task of taking the mission that one step further. And then passes it on to the next. How much more crucial is that understanding when we're not just thinking about buildings, but about the very essence of the mission of God's church. Maybe, though, Notre Dame is symbolic of the journey of the Western Church in another way, in that the fire of modernity has brought a great catastrophe for the church, and now a massive rebuilding is required. The main difference is, whereas Notre Dame Cathedral will probably be restored to its very former splendour, though perhaps some technology will make some changes, the reshaping of the church today will need to be far more fundamental in order for us to remain relevant to a rapidly changing world. So I'm guessing I'm calling for us to lift our vision of what church might be, of what God can do in and through us as the people of God. And to see that while things are quite tough for the church at present, and that's the church not just in Australia, but I think right around the Western world, God has not abandoned us, but is calling us ever forward. And it's always been the case. It's always been the case that we think that things are really, really tough. And yet God is there with us, urging us forward, reminding us that we are a link in the chain. And we move on. How blessed we are not to have only the saints of Hebrews 11, like Abraham and Sarah, but also saints in our own lifetime who have done wonderful things for us, established great things in the church, had a vision for what a local congregation can be. How fortunate we are that we've been blessed by their visionary thought, their action, just plain hard work. They've passed the holy job of being the church into our time and place. So may we continue to be inspired by their example, and may we continue to find faith in the one who calls us ever forward. Amen. I've got that closer to 5 minutes this week, which I'm really pleased with. Blessings to you. Bye-bye.